Today on NerdOut, Fork Retrospective. Welcome back to NerdOut, the show where we take a look at Cardano and we break it down, but we don't dumb it down. Today we're talking about the Fork Retrospective. So as you may know, there was a hard fork on the Cardano mainnet. So we're just going to talk through it, what happened. You'll have a chance to ask your questions because I won't cover everything. It's been kind of a blur the last 36 hours or so for me. So we'll just walk through it. I'll give you as much information transparently as I can. And then hopefully you guys continue the conversation and we can move forward as a community. So what exactly happened? An unplanned hard fork occurred on both the preview test net and later on the Cardano mainnet. What happened is a transaction occurred that was accepted by some versions of Cardano node and was rejected by others. And so because of this, the chain split into two sources of truth for what the ledger state was. Neither of them was technically incorrect because the transaction was accepted. And if you're a code is law person, you have to just accept that both of these forks were equally valid. Forks are very common on blockchains. We have many of them on Cardano every single day. They're usually very short-lived and they're resolved after 2, maybe 3 blocks because the chain very quickly reaches consensus based on rules, like what's the longest chain, what chain has the most block density, etc. We also have on Cardano the hard fork combinator. You may have heard of this, and this allows us to do planned hard forks. And usually we vote on them with our governance structure. We vote on them to ensure that most of the nodes are prepared for it, have agreed to follow the new rules that will come into effect at each new era. The next hard fork we're going to be doing is the Dijkstra era, and we'll have an on-chain vote on this. We'll have new rules for Dijkstra, and the nodes will upgrade ahead of time. And then once that hard fork is implemented, all the nodes will immediately, all at the same time, start following the new rules. So any nodes that haven't upgraded will find themselves on the fork that is not moving forward. And so the old chain usually dies very quickly as most nodes are upgraded. The majority of the stake in the network is on the upgraded nodes. So that's how things typically happen. In this case, we had an unplanned hard fork. So let's go through kind of the timeline of what happened. This is very rough. I'm sure a whole lot more happened. I haven't gotten a whole lot of sleep in the last 36 hours. So stuff will be left out of this, but feel free to ask questions below here on YouTube or on Twitter or wherever you're watching this video. I'll do my best to answer them. So we had a transaction we saw that happened on the preview network, and it contained a double stake pool hash. I don't remember whether it was a delegation or an updated certificate, something. But essentially, instead of 28 bytes long, it was double that length. And the code of one node said, oh, it's not 28 bytes. I'm rejecting that transaction. The other node said, oh, it's more than 28 bytes. I'll truncate it to 28 and use it. And so there was nothing that hurt the chain because of this transaction. It just caused a fork in what nodes were willing to accept. So when I saw this on the preview chain, I was notified by some other SPOs that this had happened. And so I immediately notified the Intersect Security Working Group that I'm a part of, and we started tracking the incident. We initially marked it as a severity 3 because no funds were at risk. It was on a test net. Everything, we're working towards a fix, but it wasn't marked as super severe at that time. And we figured we could resolve the issue on the test net and then roll out a patch to mainnet and kind of never have a problem on mainnet. That was kind of the plan. However, a similar transaction, but not the same. The one on the preview environment was not a Conway transaction. The one on mainnet was a Conway transaction. So likely it was done by two different people. I have no evidence for that, but that's just kind of a working assumption I'm going off of. Um, so that transaction was submitted to mainnet in the middle of the night. I was woken up by my phone alerting system saying, "Hey, I have an alert that says node behind." So when I see a node that falls behind the tip of the blockchain, I'll get an alert on my phone. And so some of my nodes were on one fork, some were on the other fork. So I of course got an alert saying, "Hey, node's behind." And so then I very quickly realized that the transaction had happened on mainnet. So the security working group assembled a war room of technical experts from all different teams. We also assembled much of the communications teams from all the founding entities and the community to because a lot of times resolving a hard fork does require coordination and communication between people. It would have eventually played out on its own, but we decided to have a war room and see if there was anything we could do to lessen the impact of the hard fork. Eventually, it would have resolved itself anyway after so many blocks, because this transaction would have become permanent on a fork, and it would have either resolved itself as people switched to that chain, or it could have ended up a permanent hard fork, kind of like we have Ethereum Classic today, where that there was transactions that were undone on Ethereum today, and the Ethereum Classic people said, no, we don't want to undo those transactions. So it was kind of that event, but it would have resolved itself either by eventually there being two separate networks, or there being the chains remerging again, and we eventually merged the chains. So there were people from Intersect, IOG, CF, Emergo, and the Cardano community were fully represented there. The goal of that is to have it be as small as possible, as early as possible, so that we can lessen the impact of any security incident. But it quickly became clear that there was no further damage that could be done. And so the decision was made to be pretty actively transparent about this in real time, because that would also aid in the communication. There were very difficult decisions made in the room, but we did come together on a plan, and we executed on that plan. It required both a technical fix, but it also relied heavily on the communications infrastructure we had in place, because it required us communicating with stake pool operators and exchanges and anybody operating Cardano infrastructure. So eventually the fork was resolved, and we are now following the chain that has omitted the special transaction. So it's no longer on chain, and it's not possible for transactions like that to be on chain anymore, because most of the stake weight is on node versions that will reject those transactions. So somebody could submit another one today, and it would be gone within a block or two, just as any transaction that somebody submitted that wasn't considered valid by the overall stake of the network. So let's talk about chickens versus pigs. As I mentioned earlier, the transaction that was submitted was legitimate, meaning that it was accepted by some of the network. So code is law. It was a legitimate transaction. It was paid for. The person paid an extra little bit of ADA to put the bigger hash into the block. and it was early on, it was unclear which chain should win. There were some people in the war room that thought that the chain containing the long hash transaction should move forward because that was moving up quickly. But early on, we decided to call. We couldn't just call it good or bad or poisoned or unpoisoned. So we landed on chickens versus pigs. The chicken chain was the one that had omitted the transaction. The pig chain was the one that had accepted the transaction. And so this allowed us to kind of talk about the two chains in a little more dispassionate way, even if we personally were in favor of one chain or the other. And there was very strong disagreements in the room as to which chain we should encourage to win. Either chain could have become the canonical chain, and Cardano would have survived either way. Both chains continued to add blocks during the entire incident, and neither chain ever fully stopped. So what were some of the chain differences? The newer upgraded node operators on 10.3 to 10.5, those nodes accepted the transaction. This was the pig chain, and it was moving up faster than the chicken chain. So this looked like the pig chain was the one that was going to win. However, on the chicken chain, we had a whole lot of users. So dataless users, eternal users, any dApps that were using DB Sync for their backend, they were all on version 10.1.4, and that did not accept the transaction. So they were all on the chicken chain. Me personally, I was on Team Pig initially because I thought, hey, the longest chain should win out. However, this would likely require some manual command line intervention for all dataless users, which is a support nightmare. You'd have to work through support to get them to run some command line thing to fix their dataless database and upgrade all dataless users to a node version that supported the pig chain. And so this would also mean that we would have to support this malformed transaction until the next official hard fork at minimum, and possibly forever into the future if that was the decision. So it was a risk, but I chose to switch my support at some point to the chicken chain. The risk was that we only had 2160 blocks before the malformed transaction became permanent on the pig chain. So the way Cardano works is it has kind of this validity window where once a block is 2160 blocks old, it moves into the immutable portion of the ledger, and then a node can no longer easily switch between forks. So there's kind of this, a fork can live so long before it has to pick a chain, essentially. And so in order to make the chicken chain the winning chain, we had to patch the latest node version so that it no longer accepted the pig transaction. We had to get more than 50% of the stake onto the chicken chain. Our initial estimate was that we thought most of the stake was on the chicken chain, but it turned out to be kind of a false assumption. So we had to communicate to get a lot of the stake to move over to the chicken chain, and do this all within 2160 blocks. So if we could pull that off and make the chicken chain longer before 2160 blocks, then the pig chain would naturally rejoin the chicken chain. It would have a rollback, and then all wallets, dApps, etc., could just start working again. So that was my thinking, is that Cardano is not just the chain itself. Cardano is the chain plus the dApps, plus the apps, plus the wallets, plus everything. And so it was kind of a calculated risk for me to support the chicken chain, because more of that would come back online quicker. There'd be less PR damage to Cardano as a whole. if we went with pig chain, it may have been more difficult and we could have been down for, a week or so as everybody upgraded the infrastructure needed to this, the pig chain. So yeah, if we failed to have the chicken chain win, it would be bad for PR, since we would then also have to have a separate communication to go out to say, oh yeah, we tried to get you on chicken chain, but no, the pig chain actually won. So now we need you to go back, and it would just have been kind of a support nightmare and communication nightmare. But thankfully, we did get to the chains joining before the 2160 blocks, and it was interesting to see because as more people moved from pig to chicken, the pig chain slowed down its block production, which actually gave us more and more and more time to get to that 2160 blocks. So we started out going, we have to pull this off within 9 hours, to, okay, now we have more time. Now we have more time. Now we have 16 hours. Oh, now we have 36 hours before the chains need to cross. So it was nice to see, as exchanges, as the founding entities, as the stake pool operators moved over from pig to chicken, we could see that pig chain slow down, and that actually gave us more time for the chains to rejoin each other. So that was good. So what are some takeaways? The Cardano community is very resilient, even though we fight a lot. We were able to come together when it mattered. So one of my takeaways is we should assume anything that happens on testnet will make its way to mainnet. The initial Severity 3 incident had to be upgraded to a Sev 1 once it hit mainnet, of course. Transparency is important. While some security incidents need to be kept quiet to prevent further damage, this one was shared pretty publicly once it hit mainnet, because it was clear no further damage was possible other than what had already occurred. You couldn't fork it into 3 chains or 4 chains. It was only going to be 2 chains, and the forks were going to live until one of them submitted or the fork became permanent after the 2160 blocks. And we'd have to decide, are we going to just abandon one of the chains or not? So also a takeaway for me is chain forks are a risk for partner chains. This is something that needs to be thought about before the launch of Midnight. So the Midnight testnet was dependent upon the preview environment. And so we need to figure out options and strategies in the event this would happen again, especially if and when mainnet for Midnight is live. So I'm sure that team is going to have their own retrospective and make sure that their planning and strategy takes this incident into account. Another interesting takeaway is that there was only around a little more than 500 transactions lost on the pig chain after it rolled back and rejoined the chicken chain. Many transactions were added to both chains because the nodes were still communicating and sharing transactions while this whole thing was going on. So if somebody added a transaction to a node that was following one chain and it was valid on the other, it usually made its way to both chains. There was also an attempt to replay these missing transactions if they were still valid. Some of them may have gone out of their validity window before they could be replayed, or some dApp may have done something different on one chain versus the other, so they may not have been valid for that reason. But there will still be a whole retrospective analyzing these transactions, and an attempt was made to replay them on the final winning chain. So also, real damage was still done. While Cardano technically never went down, it was effectively down for many users. There were some dApps that couldn't happen. My own project, USDM, we minted late. There was a mint that happened, like an hour late, because we had to upgrade infrastructure, figure out which chain we were going to follow. And, I upgraded infrastructure once to the pig chain and then rolled all that back, resynced everything, put it back on the chicken chain. And, the USDM mint went through after that point. And we also asked exchanges to halt deposits and withdrawals while all this was sorted out, because you don't want to have funds, getting withdrawn, and then the exchange thinks they paid a person, and then suddenly, poof, it disappears from their wallet at some point in the future. That's not a cool thing to happen. Other takeaways: both tech and communications were bright spots in the response. Both were very, very effective. Some mistakes were made. We had to do 2 patches on the tech side, but there needed to be an extra patch for people who were building the node from source. But both tech and communications were very effective at communicating what SPOs and exchanges and node operators needed to do. Finally, I'm not going to condemn the individual involved in this transaction. I've been there myself. At one point in the past, I made the guild network unusable back in the day, and that team decided to restart the guild network from scratch. So the guild network we have is not the original guild network, because I registered a crap ton of stake addresses on it, and that was during the time that that epoch transitions were very slow, and the guild team wanted faster epoch transitions because they had faster epochs, and it was painful for them to go through this long 10 to 20 minute block drought every time the epoch switched on that network. So, I have done things on test nets. Also, this person's role in the community is pretty important. So what they do is they sit on Telegram and they onboard new SPOs. So they're largely one of the reasons we have such a vibrant SPO community, why there are so many SPOs in the community. I'm not particularly friends with him. I've often clashed personality-wise. He has oftentimes played a role in holding up a mirror to my face when my own ethics have not been the best. So while I'm not super tight with this person, I have been able to work with him in the past. He helped me test a lot of stuff in the early days of Firehose, where we were testing from different sides of the world whether or not transaction chaining at a massive scale could work. So, Drip Drops owes a lot to those early day tests. Yeah, so it'll be up to the community what to do here in this situation. We have 2 options. I'm not going to advocate for any one of these positions. You could burn the person to the ground, or you can offer a path to redemption in the community. It is what it is. People will have different opinions. At this time, I'm not going to come down on one side or the other as to what happens. So again, thank you for your attention to this matter. I just thought it important to share some of my thoughts as somebody who was kind of in the room where things were happening. I definitely missed stuff in the video. I missed, everything that happened as it played out over the course. So if you have any questions, ask in the comments down below if you're watching this on YouTube, or on X if you're watching it there. But yeah, let's continue the conversation, and hopefully we can all move forward together as a community. And with that, nerd out.